Hello, everybody. Roger Durling, Executive Director of the Santa Barbara International Film Festival, and I'm very honored to have Director Hao Wu and producer Jean Tisen from the film 76 Days. I should point out that the film is distributed by MTV Documentary Films. It was shortlisted for the Academy Awards for the Best Documentary Feature. It won the Audience Award for Documentary Feature at the AFI Fest. It was nominated for Best Documentary at the Gotham Awards. It's a New York Times Critics Pick, and it's 100% on Rotten Tomatoes. I should also, before I ask my first question, today we've hit a milestone, a grim milestone, 500 deaths in the country due to COVID. So my heart goes to all the families and friends that have lost somebody to this terrible disease. I'll start with how one of the things that I was so impressed with your film, with your documentary, is your focus. You focus on the individual experience, and you forego the bigger environment, and you focus on the human perseverance and the human kindness of the first 76 days of the epidemic. Can you tell us on why that narrow focus?
I think as a documentary filmmaker, the kind of film we make influenced by two main factors. One is the footage we have access to. In this case, we have like very unique, very raw, very emotional footage shot at 4 different hospitals in Wuhan during the 76 days of lockdown. So doing editing, it was, even though we actually did try to experiment with adding news clips and also some like bigger context, right? Try to contextualize the story, but somehow we always found that it distracted from the human stories there. And secondly, another factor I think is basically the filmmaker's intention. First of all, this is not my film. This is the team's film, right? I have two wonderful co-directors who took enormous personal health risk and to get to shoot the story. And also, I work very closely with Jean, not only during production, also during post-production as well to finish the story. I think for all of us, I think our initial instinct was investigative. Really, we wanted to find out what happened, who was at fault, to have made this outbreak so bad, essentially, especially the early lockdown in Wuhan was truly, truly chaotic and hellish. But then I think later on, as we watch the pandemic, spread to other countries, and we watch countries from authoritarian states to democracies, all kind of, most of them fumble in its initial response. I think for us is that maybe it's too early while we still are living through this pandemic to be drawing conclusions, to be giving commentaries about what's happening in Wuhan. Instead, I think as we were feeling that the same stories are being replayed over and over again all over the world, especially like Gina and I were in New York at that time, when New York City in March and April, when the pandemic hit New York, we really did feel like it's the same story being played here in New York City. So we just wanted to highlight the universal, because we really don't want the pandemic to stick, the narrative around the pandemic to be purely about numbers or to be purely about political divide, either domestically or internationally.
Jean, before I forget, I'm so glad that Hao mentioned that there is 3 directors, to the film. There is one that is credited as anonymous. Can you tell us why the 3rd director is credited as anonymous?
I'll let Hal answer that, actually. So Hal is the only director I work closely, and to this day, I haven't met the other 2 co-directors. So I'll let Hal answer that.
Yeah,
Yeah,
okay.
so basically, because I've become during the production, we try to keep it under wrap because we didn't know where the film was going, and also there was so much geopolitical tension around any COVID narrative. So we kept it titled as need to know basis. So I reached out to. Basically, I reached out to over a dozen filmmakers who have started filming in Wuhan. I reached out to them in early February. By mid-February, I found the two co-directors, and then I think Jing officially came on board in late March, early April, once we decided to start start with the post-production process, even though she was consulting on a consulting basis during the production as well. So one of the so of my two co-directors, both of them are reporters in China. Wei Shi Chen is a video reporter for Esquire China, and he wasn't sent by Esquire. That's not Esquire's regular beat. He wasn't sent by Esquire to go to Wuhan, but as an aspiring filmmaker himself, he decided to go down there to really document history in the making. He was actually turned away by 4 different hospitals before he found a way to embed himself with a medical team that was sent from elsewhere in China to Wuhan to support a local hospital. That's how he found access. My other co-director, Anonymous, he's a photojournalist for Wuhan, a very local state-owned newspaper. So he already knew a lot of the hospitals, even before COVID. He was there in the hospital taking photos for the news stories. But then I think for a long time, we weren't sure where we would take the story. And also because for Anonymous, he has only worked for state-owned newspaper media companies. He's really afraid of any potential backlash or blowback from either the government, the government, even though this film is, we would like to think it's apolitical, but still the government might frown upon our portrayal, especially of the early chaos. And also he's afraid of the nationalistic internet trolls who views any depiction of China in any negative light to be unpatriotic. So he was afraid of them going after him. That's why he insisted on remaining anonymous.
So, I mean, but, to Gene, maybe you can answer this question. Has the Chinese government seen the film, or are they aware of the film? And what has been the reaction?
Chinese government hasn't seen the film. Very early on when Hal approached me with the film, and we already decided it's not going to be, we don't want to go through all the censorship inside of China. And so, but recently it was pirated. So I'm sure someone in the government watched the film, but we haven't heard anything terrible about it. So I just want to piggyback earlier your first question: why the human story? Mm-hmm. So actually, how didn't mention during that time, I just knew there was every single broadcaster have their own COVID story, and I could just imagine everybody wants to go into the investigated story, the current event. And because also Hal was experiencing a deep grief with his grandfather passing. So when I saw the first 3 scenes he sent me, and I just knew it's the human story that we should really focus on. In a way, it is Hal's of therapy. That there was just so much that personal grief going on. And that was another reason why we just focus on the human kindness.
No, it's really, I mean, it is a difficult watch, but one of the things that is so compelling about it is that we have faces to the people, and we grow to know them and feel for them, and it adds a humanity to the experience, and I think it's necessary watch. How can you tell us about? So you were not in Wuhan. Can you tell us how you were working? So the two other directors that were filming were inside the hospitals, and how tell us the process of how you collaborated with them.
Yeah, so essentially because my two co-directors, they didn't know each other. They were essentially operating individually. So there's no other crew, just themselves inside the different hospitals filming. the way we collaborated was every day, because they had to leave the camera inside the contamination zone. Anytime they take anything out of the contamination zone, they have to thoroughly disinfect them, right? With alcohol, that's gonna ruin the machine. So they will leave the camera inside. They will only take the discs out, and then every night they will upload the rushes onto a cloud service in China. And being in New York, I would download them in New York. But then because of the Great Firewall, there will always be a couple of days delay because the download speed was pretty low and slow. And yeah, I mean, after watching the rushes, I will have discussion with them about some more technical issue like sound recording, but mostly we would like to think we're discussing characters, because I would point out a certain character story are compelling, maybe follow them more. But ultimately, I think my co-director made almost all the on the ground filming decision, because some character we were interested in following early on. Later on, they were transferred to different hospitals, or they simply passed away. So it's really hard to keep track of who might be our main characters. In the end, I think the film really came together during editing.
So, but I mean, so I understand, and I'm retracing a little bit, is that you would see the rushes and then you would later talk to them about strategy, basically, about, maybe we should go more focus in this direction. Maybe we should start following this characters. Is that more or less?
That's correct. That's correct. I also we also discussed, let's maybe, for a while we thought about going outside of the hospitals as well. So I encourage them to film volunteers, to film other, even some dissidents. We actually filmed some dissidents, but all those ones were primarily down later in the film process, like in sit-down interviews. In the end, for artistic reason, we didn't include them because they just don't cut well. This almost feels like a completely different film because those footage were interview-driven.
And this might be a little too technical, but I'm curious about, so you had the two directors, they also had to be in the personal, the PPE equipment. And they had to go through all the process that we see that right? I mean, they had to be covered in the hazmat suits and everything.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think they had to go through the daily ritual of putting on the PPEs at the beginning of the day and the end of the day, totally disinfecting, taking off and infecting themselves, coming out of the contamination zone. So I think that very early on, the production challenges for my co-directors were primarily, first of all, the physical extreme discomfort, right, of we're putting on the multiple PPEs and sealing off all the openings, so you could hardly breathe when you're putting on the face goggles on, and also the fear of contracting the virus. That was in the early days of lockdown. Very little was known, so people were so afraid of contracting COVID. And one of my co-directors, Wei Chen, actually had high fever for an entire week. So he thought he would die, but later on he went to the hospital. The COVID test came back to negative, but still today we didn't know whether that test was accurate. But later on in production, I think once they got used to the physical discomfort, it's more about the mental anguish of watching people dying in front of their camera and feeling completely helpless. So many times I would encourage them to take a day break. But also, I really encourage them to go back. I say, as filmmakers, as storytellers, our responsibility here, even though we cannot save anyone medically, but our job is to document history for posterity.
And how they had access, they're inside. How they made themselves feel so intimate with the doctors and the nurses and the patients. It never looks as if it's intrusive what they're doing, that they were welcomed in there.
It took a while at the very beginning, right? At the very beginning, like I said, where she was turned away 4 times at different hospitals. And then even after he arrived with the medical team, the local receiving hospitals was a little bit suspicious of him because he was the only one carrying camera around. But I think that's, there's no trick in documentary filmmaking. The only trick is that investing time to build up trust, right? So they were there. Both my co-directors were there day in and day out. They spent so much time with the patients, with the medical workers, and gradually their guards came down. That's one. And secondly, I think especially for the patients, all of them were asked to stay inside of their hospital rooms. They have so little human-to-human interaction. So for them to be asked, even like to be asked questions by a cameraman, for them it's a nice way to at least have some kind of communication. I think in some ways, there are so many testimonies that the patients gave in front of the camera about the early horror, about the pain, about their hope and fear in front of the camera. We only ended up including just a little bit. But then for the patients, the camera almost became their therapy.
And actually a question to both of you, and I'll start with Jean. When did you start first hearing about the pandemic? How were you feeling about it? And obviously you've told me that you started getting involved with the film, in March, April. Why did you think it was important? And how was your feeling about the pandemic at that time, at that stage?
Well, sure. Actually, because I read Chinese newspaper, right? And so I start hearing the Wuhan virus, actually. And then actually in January, I was working in LA and I was traveling back and forth. And my brother actually say, wear a mask. And I say, why? And then when I was working on Asian American series for PBS, that's when the lockdown happened. I flew back right away, pulled my mask on, and just went into quarantine right away. But before that, because of, Trump say it's Kung flu, and all that, I personally was, not verbally attacked, but, when I was riding on the subway, I have gotten those terrible looks that I never thought I would experience in America. I'm an immigrant. I've been here almost 50 years. I've never seen that kind of hatred towards Asians. So that was really the beginning. And when I saw what House sent me, the footage, I just want to show the humanities. I said, the common virus, the common enemy is the virus, is not people. And this is when I say this film is so important. I need to get involved, but we have to really put a human story into that film.
And how about you? When did you first start hearing about it? And you were here in the United States when it was happening, of course.
I started hearing about it on Chinese social media back in January, but then very few people were taking that seriously. And on the day of Wuhan lockdown, when Wuhan started locking down, I actually flew back to Shanghai to spend Chinese New Year with my parents and my sister's family there. It was a surreal Chinese New Year celebration because even though Shanghai was far away from Wuhan, but as soon as Wuhan was put under official lockdown, the rest of China, entire country, went into voluntary shutdown. So Shanghai is China's largest city, but there's nobody walking on the street. It was like a ghost town. It was like almost like a zombie film set. So I was spending entire 10 days with my family inside in the apartment, just scrolling through social media, trying to understand what was happening. And then I think normally as a filmmaker, I don't like to make films about newsy topics because I always question, as a storyteller, what else can I bring to a topic that's been well covered by news media. But this time it felt very different because I experienced it. And also in early March, my grandpa passed away after I came back to the US. I couldn't go back to say goodbye to him. And because of COVID travel restrictions. So for me, it just became very important. I need to tell a story about this. And also, I think what I mentioned it before, I think for me, it's really about, like also what Jim mentioned, is really about putting a human face on this story.
And then once you started working on the project and you had those two, the two directors working with you, was there an attempt on your behalf to go back to Wuhan and to bear witness?
Absolutely. So I was like dying to get back. I mean, it's kind of bizarre. It's like for filmmakers, I guess it's almost like war photographers. You just want to be there to witness history. So I was itching to go back. We made very extensive plans for me to fly back in February to fly back to Shanghai, and then for me to be smuggled inside of Wuhan because Wuhan was under lockdown. Only some medical supply trucks were allowed to going in. So we arranged all of that, the almost like quote unquote smuggling route to take me inside. But I think approaching the end of February, I canceled the trip once I realized that the virus was really coming to the US, because at that time we were still not sure whether the film would be entirely about Wuhan only, or we were making a more global story. So at that time we're thinking maybe once we come to US, we can compare and contrast the US and China's response. So I decided to stay in New York and film, which I actually did. So in late March and early February, I did film in New York City.
Now, and Gene, you can chime in if you feel it's appropriate. You in the documentary, we focus on the grandpa with dementia. We focus on and we grow to know and love the couple that wants to, to have the newborn. We also follow the nurse that has the belongings and is calling the people to get. When did you guys started deciding that those were the characters that we needed to follow?
Well, actually, when I first watched the 3 scenes of How Send Me, I was kind of worried that, everybody is covered up. There are no real characters that you can see fully. So that was the first biggest challenge. But then because the scene moved me so much to the point, I say, let's just go see where do we end up, right? And luckily we have the grandpa character. He become also the comic relief. Yeah. And he has actually a complete, he was the only one, it's like the thread line for us.
Yeah, he has a full arc.
Yes.
Yeah.
And also because he was there the longest. How can tell you more about that?
Yeah. So doing editing, I think one thing we at the very beginning, we definitely struggled because this is not in a traditional documentary, you will have some main characters, and also you would normally you will have them to do sit-down interviews to explain their backstory to you. But I think with this one, I guess we once we started editing, we just realized that the variety scenes, the observational scenes, were so powerful. And anytime we cut in some interview, it kind of ruined the emotional intensity. And then other than the grandpa, to be perfectly honest, other than the grandpa, all the other characters, they appear 3 or 4 times. None of the others could be viewed as a traditional main character in documentary film. So we're struggling with how to structure this film for a little bit. But in the end, I think we just got inspiration from the Frederick Wiseman films, right? All the classic observational films, and also from some of the filmmakers' friends' film, like Ramona Diaz's The Motherland, is about a largest maternity hospital in the Philippines. And then we just realized, wait, this is not about one or a few main characters. This is really a group portrayal of a group of people trying to survive this together, right? And then once we reach that kind of liberation, we're just trying to find the best scenes possible of all the characters in our footage. And then they're like little pearl, which then we try to string them together. Once they string them together into a rough assembly, we just remove some kind of redundant one-off characters, but let the other character as much as possible to have some character repeating more often. But in the end, if you actually watch the film carefully, other than Grandpa, all the other characters, they all just appears at different frequencies. Some people 4 times, 3 times, 2 times, or just once. So yeah, it is this film is a good portrayal.
I'm glad that you brought up the observational tone of the documentary. When it came to editing, you forgo titles. Also, the passage of time. We are aware of it as an audience, but there is a passage of time. Can you tell us about the editing and how did you arrive at that rhythm and also in trusting us as a viewer that we were going to be able to follow it?
So I think the two things I would like to add here. One thing is, when I was doing production, I was reading a lot about past pandemic, right? I mean, especially the Spanish flu. What I realized is that there can be great history books about the Spanish flu, but what I was dying for was the human stories, the images, how people lived through that, which was lacking in the historical archives. So I think doing post-production, I think we just feel like, because right now for viewers like yourself, they would be so inundated by news stories, analysis, timelines, stats about this pandemic. We feel like we want to keep, for posterity's sake, just the other side that's not captured in the news, which are the human stories. So that's why we consciously decided not to include title cards to explain beat by beat the progression of the outbreak and also the lockdown and in Wuhan. Secondly, I think it was really helpful when in early April, Gina and I we both realized we found the container of the film. I remember it was April, right after, right before the lockdown was lifted. I was watching a video of the shot on a cell phone video shared on Chinese social media of the city just stopping for 3 minutes and moving together while the air siren was wailing, right, all over the city. I remember I was crying uncontrollably at that time. And then I knew instinctively that should be the ending of the film, because that's basically a whole city, even though they have survived the trauma, but they're mourning the dead. They're looking warily ahead, trying to survive the post, after the trauma, right? And then once we know that's the ending, and we know the beginning, so we just decided, okay, so we want to really give a emotionally accurate portrayal of the early lockdown days, which is fear, panic of the unknown, absolute chaos. And then we want to end there with the lifting of the lockdown and when the city gets together and moon. And in between, it's about managing life under a pandemic, because even though in a pandemic, life still continues, babies are born, there's humor once people have time, and there's about looking for families, trying to reunite with family, and sometimes surprisingly you found surrogate family in the most unlikely places, which is the hospital.
And how I have so many questions. I hope I'm not boring you with with all of the career. There is heartbreak and there is death, and how was it difficult for you to find how much to show and how there are certain moments that you rightly so stay away from showing us certain things. Can you tell us about finding the balance?
Yes, it's all these the balancing decision all came during editing, right? I mean, I think one of the principle we adhere to was not look away, because the horrors of the pandemic, a lot of times I think for a variety of reasons, I just don't feel like we have seen, we know the true horror enough. That's in my thinking, that's part of the reason why there's still so many deniers in this country. They still think COVID is just a bad flu. So we definitely want to show, we wanted to give an unflinching look and the horrors that this thing, COVID, the disease can inflict on individuals and families. But at the same time, I just feel like, I don't know. I mean, I guess for me, it's a personal instinctive decision, because during the first 2 months of editing, every day I would start editing a new scene. I would start crying, burst into tears. I guess that's because, like I said, I was mourning my grandpa, and there was so much uncertainty in the U.S. about our own lockdown, right? And when is that gonna end? Also, Black Lives Matter, the protest was all over the country. So for me,
Yeah.
dealing with the footage, living through tragedy, having, and being able to cry, to have the emotional release was truly cathartic. And also to be able to hold on these little evidences of human kindness and the hope. I think that's also necessary for me personally as an individual going through that. So I think all of that influence, at the very beginning, probably subconsciously my editing decisions. But then later on, I think Gina and I would definitely look at the film. We definitely want to balance out, for example, some of the body bag. We have several more scenes of people being wrapped up, being wheeled away in body bags. We took them out because we're like, that's gratuitous. We don't need that. As long and then for certain shots, we want to keep like respectful, right? Even though we don't want to blur anybody's faces, but we trust the shots we pick. We're showing respect to the stricken, and also like in terms of balancing the old grandpa to the comic relief. As soon as the early panic phase was over, we do intentionally want to bring him back periodically, and because, first of all, that's true life. He was there every day bothering the medical worker. But secondly, it's like, we also want to take the viewers out of the hospital, the claustrophobic environment every once in a while, to breathe in the city. So all of this come into play during the fine cutting stage.
I think the hardest tragedy, is like, you cannot say goodbye to your loved one. I think coming out of this, that's a universal tragedy. And so we just start with that's the hardest opening. And we just pull that out. And once we get over that, then we can focus on the human story. Mm-hmm. So that's why also we start with this horrific, nurse crying for her father.
Correct. Yeah. I mean, you mentioned the body bags, and we have seen that on TV, but they're faceless, but they're still human bodies in there. To me, I was heartbroken seeing the phones, the belongings, and that was as sobering as anything I've seen. That all those belongings were part of somebody's identity at some point. And can you tell us about the hazmat suits, the writings, and how did that start right away? That they write on each other's hazmat suits, and what are the things that they write on each other's hazmat suits?
Yeah, so from the very beginning, because everybody had multiple layers of PPEs on, right? So they have to write each other's name on the back of the hazmat suit. Otherwise, you cannot tell them apart, especially in urgent medical conditions, right? You want to save some patient, you need help. You need to be able to differentiate one from the other. But later on, as the situation stabilized, people have more time. They use that as a canvas, to voice their desires. Sometimes it's about missing their girlfriends or their spouse. A lot of times it's about the food they miss, because during the lockdown, all the restaurants in Wuhan was closed down, and then there were only like, bento box meals, box meals shipped over to the hospital. It's the same food day in and day out. They miss food. They miss their Starbucks lattes, which is Starbucks really popular in China. And also, as shown in the film, sometimes they draw flowers, and to as an artistic expression.
Mm-hmm. No, it's very touching to watch those scenes where they're doing it to each other, drawing flowers or endearing things to each other's hazmat suits. Jean, you touched a little bit upon this about your feelings at the beginning of the pandemic. How through this process of making this film, how have your feelings changed about the pandemic?
Well, I actually moved right back in with my 85-year-old mom. And last summer, there was time I took her to the doctor. The doctor said she actually belongs in the hospital with her heart condition. But even the family doctor said, but we can't put her in the hospital, so we're going to treat her at home. And it was those moments compared to what other people are suffering and experiencing, I feel like I have a lucky. I'm able to stay home and take care of my mom. So last Thursday, I took my mom to get her first shot, a Pfizer shot. The minute the nurse put the shot in, 3, 2, 1, I got so emotional because it means there's hope now, maybe not 2021, maybe the end of 2020, maybe 2022, some normalcy can come back. It really gave me hope. So it taught me a lot about patience, and also just, I actually pray every day too. I lost some friends. I pray every day to them.
Mm-hmm. And how about you? How has your feelings changed throughout this whole process?
It's really complicated. I think I'm still trying to understand, reading a lot, trying to understand how we should view this pandemic, because based on my reading, a lot of times whenever human society encounters some kind of plague, or during the time of Black Death, Spanish flu, and also the AIDS pandemic, our tendency is to assign blame. So blame others, scapegoating others for our own failures. So for a while, I was really depressed. But then I think working on this film, to see that there's ample evidence. But by the way, this is not just limited to Wuhan to China. I was here in New York. I have a lot of friends who are medical doctors who are in the hospitals. So I feel like those examples, human behavior, human capacity to be kind, to be supportive to each other in times of crisis, that's universal. So that, in the same time, that gave me hope. So working on this film gave me hope, even though right now we are still dealing with so many issues, right? Like even like how to equitably distribute a vaccine, not just trying to protect ourselves, but also distributing them to developing nations. So because this is truly a global crisis, it's not just because even if the US, we can inoculate everyone, the virus is still going to come back if there are other developing nations that still harbors the virus. So yeah, I'm still thinking, but I guess I see hope.
Mm-hmm. And last question to both of you: what would you like people to get out of when they see your film, 76 Days? Let's start with Jean.
Well, main thing, my original idea was I need to show the virus is, the common enemy. I just want people to be kind to your neighbor, to strangers. It's don't blame on the Asian, the Chinese. It's really, let's just fight this together. Then we'll have a better tomorrow. Only, when we all come together, we have a better tomorrow.
Yeah. How?
Yeah, I think first of all, I would like to, for people to drag their friends or family who still think COVID is just a bad flu, force them to watch this film. I don't know how effective that will be in terms of changing their opinions. It's like, this is real, right? I mean, that's the first goal. But secondly, I like what Jean said is I really want people to. I hope this is one of many films that's going to come out in 2021 about the human experience living through this. Like Jean said, is that we're all the same faced with this virus. We're all the same, and the only way we can survive this is by working with each other and support each other, and to seek more commonality rather than highlighting our differences.
Yeah, what I love when I watch the film is just to be reminded of the heroic effort of the doctors and the nurses. I mean, to watching firsthand, being in there and watching their efforts. It was, Jean, you have used the term, the humanity. It definitely is so palpable in your film, the humanity, people looking after each other. It's very, very, very moving and powerful statement.
even now when I go see my doctor, I actually know they're also suffering, psychologically wearing this. It's been a year now. And I just say, thank you for your service, really.
No, yes.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you so much to the two of you, and congratulations on the film being shortlisted for the Oscar Best Documentary, and it was just terrific to talk to you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
And be
Bye-bye.
safe.
Thank
Yep.
you.